Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and jump into Chapter 12, How to Work with Tables, and a quick update on tables and covering Chapter 12 in general. In the history of web development, tables in the early days were used for um, page layout, and so if you want to, move things into the upper left-hand corner, you would make the entire page a table, and then in the upper left-hand cell, you would put an image or whatever it may be. So in the early days, I would just, in the 90s, tables were used for page layout, and then they came along and said, well, that's not a good practice because it adds a whole lot of markup to your HTML. The HTML should be for content and it should be for structure. It should not be for layout. And so, using tables for layout was considered bad practice. And they said you need to use CSS for layout. And so that's kind of what we're doing today with using Flexbox. We have parent containers and child containers and those kinds of things. But if you really stop and think about the other approaches that are out there for layout, we are using Bootstrap. And in Bootstrap, you have divs, which are rows, right? So you have a wrapper, and then inside of the wrapper you have a row, and inside of the row you have a div, which is a column. And so you really replaced table markup, like the table tag and TR tag, with divs. And so we really haven't escaped kind of this concept of, what I'm saying is, although we're not using table tags for layout, we've kind of gone back that direction today in modern web development, because if you look at a Bootstrap grid, you got a bunch of divs with classes on them that ultimately are there for positioning. Those divs are there to make rows and columns for a page. So we got away from tables in page layout, and kind of we've gone back in that direction. So we're going to learn the basics of using tables and using some CSS to style those tables, talk about some accessibility features for tables, and then media queries. I'll tell you real quick, we're going to use Bootstrap tables as well. So very quickly, we'll introduce Bootstrap, and so I don't want to leave Bootstrap out of the conversation anymore. Moving forward in these lectures. And so, the theory is nowadays, what you want to use an HTML table for is data. And so what they would, basically say tabular data. And so data that is formatted well in a table, and it looks it looks good in a table. And so we're not supposed to use tables for layout. We're supposed to use tables for putting lots of data in that looks good in a table format. And so, you have, like on day 3 of this class, we went through a Codecademy tutorial, and you wrote this code. So this code really shouldn't be new to you. The parent element for a table is very simply the table tag, and then each row is contained in a table row tag, a TR tag, and then each cell inside of the row, well, if it's a heading, meaning it's at the top of the table, it's the first row of the table, normally that first row is there to kind of describe the column, and that would be described as the table heading tag, and that's going to kind of make it bold. And then after that first row, then you've got more rows, and inside of those additional rows you get TDs, which is like the table data or tabular data, however you want to think of it. And that's a simple HTML table. just to kind of look at a finished table, went ahead and copied a little chunk of code here with here's my table, and we'll talk about some of these different like the scope attribute, but very simply, here's our table tag. Our first row contains our headers, and then after that, since this is not actually a piece of data yet, we have one more table heading. So you'll notice here, this first row has an empty cell, and then we got two table headers. And now, interestingly, the second row, we've got another table header. And now, finally, we get some TDs. So this is kind of like the first cell, and basically this TH is going to make it bold. I haven't written any CSS for this, and so just kind of see how this lines up. Now, if I haven't written any CSS, you can kind of see that the first row, again, I'm just making this table bold. This He-Man and Skeletor facts, that's what we put in the caption, and later on we're going to talk about accessibility. Now this caption tag is the first tag underneath the table, and basically what this allows a screen reader to do is, for someone who's blind, and they'll read the caption to the end user, and then the end user gets to decide whether they actually want to go into the table, or they can decide to skip it, right? So that's kind of the benefit of the caption tag, is for accessibility purposes, and it allows a screen reader to basically skip the table if the end user decides that's what they want to do. And I just wanted to show you an example where you can use these table headings even though they're not in that first row. And so you can kind of see a table doesn't have borders turned on by default when all you've done is written the HTML. And really we got TDs, which kind of give us this. We got THs, which give us the bold areas. And so pretty straightforward working with tables so far. And we're going to learn how to write a little bit of CSS to style us how we want. And so, we could do things like, text align. And so you notice here they have a class called left for the total sales table heading. And they would apply some CSS to that. So here, just like the table that we wrote, there's no CSS formatting, but we're going to start putting some CSS to it. The THead tag, TBody, and TFoot, again, is there for semantic purposes, just basically saying like, hey, to an end user, these are the headings right here. The TBody is actually the main data, right? And then the table footer is kind of like, in this case, a summary section of the table. It's there for semantics, but really visually, these tags, being THead, TBody, and TFoot, don't produce any visual output by themselves. We're going to be using CSS to change to change how our table looks. So as we start to look at CSS and how to format our tables, again, realistically, today's day and age, I'm just using a Bootstrap table, and you'll see when we get into Bootstrap, they have their own ways of applying style to a table, and but like everything else, let's go ahead and learn our own custom CSS, and then we'll learn how to do it with Bootstrap. So let's first put a border on our table, and so this is really nothing too new. We'll go up here and do a style tag and target our table. Border thin solid black. And you're going to notice that is on the outside of the table. And let's take that down. And on the table heading, THs and our TDs, let's put a border, right? So on the bolded cells and the non-bolded cells, let's put a border. So TH and TD, border thin solid red. Okay, and so when I look at this, and a lot of people, when they just do something as simple as put borders on, they go, wait a minute, I don't like this double border kind of thing that we have going on. For example, you've got a border on the right of this one and a border on the left of this one, making it visually not what you really want. And that's where you do the border collapse property. Border collapse. And that kind of gets it to look like what you would expect. And you might say, well, wait a minute, I don't want everything to butt up to the borders, so you would do, padding, 2 ends. I forgot my semicolon. Right, so you can add padding, you can add borders. You might say, well, I don't like, you might want to do text align center. Right, so you get all the text in the middle of the cells. So basic formatting on a table. What am I? Here's some classes where you can change text align left. And so on my example, maybe on these 3, I want the text align left, right? So I'm going to go row, row, row. This is the scope of row. And that's another, by the way, the scope attribute is another accessibility feature to a screen reader, to basically let them know that we're, starting a row, or this is a kind of like a row header, if you will. So what a row, this is a column header. This is considered a row header. And so when you put the scope here of call, that's letting the end user know that this is a column header. And scope of rows, letting them know this is a row header. It's not part of the data, it's just for description purposes, right? What was I going to do? Oh, I was going to put a class of left on the row, save it, class of left. Okay, and there you go. It's kind of nice because literally just everything that we learned about CSS, it all still applies here. The only thing different with the table is kind of weird is that border collapse. And that's the only thing that's all that weird here. Start putting background colors. That's another benefit, besides being semantic. If I were to add THead, TFoot, table head and table footer, and TBody, is that we can break them up and just put, we could style them differently. Like all the table foot I could style one way, the TBody I could style another, and the THead I could style another. All right, so that's another, besides just being considered more semantic. think I've covered the Nth Child with you guys before. Does that ring a bell? The Nth Child Selector?
I believe we touched on it just briefly.
TD colon Nth hyphen child 2. So this is saying for every table data that is a second child of a parent. So this TD is the second child of this TR, right? This is the first child, this is the second child. So Nth Child allows you to select the second child TD tag. Last child, kind of the same deal, like the last child of a parent. And so nth of type. These kinds of selectors will help you, alternate. One example, we could select all of the, like, I just gave a numeric, so here n represents a number, so I said all the TDs that are the second nth child, right? So that's how I used it. But you could also do all the odd rows, or even rows in a lot of times, or every third. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use these, what are called pseudo class selectors. So here's the first child being used, the nth child being used. This is every table row nth child even, and changes the background color. So let's do that. Let's just change the background color of every other TR. TR colon nth child even. I'll take this out for now. Right, so that's pretty common in formatting with tables, is that you just have different rows with different colors, so visually it's easier to see. So that's an easy way to use a built-in CSS selector to do that. So I'm going through this quick because, again, I don't think they're super difficult. I also don't think, there are a fair amount of new tags here, but tables are so easy. Like, if you ever forget the tags for a table, like, go to a quick W3 schools table and look it up, and, a little bit of practice with the CSS, some different selectors. If we remember from a couple of chapters ago, this concept of figure and Fig Caption, and how what we used it for was in the images, and what it allows you to do is wrap a caption around an image so that they're kind of semantically associated. The same thing can be done with a table, with figure and Fig Caption, which kind of gives it, let's see if total sales by book. Oh, and they don't show it. One second here. This is call span and row span, wrapping, media queries. Okay, they do have the caption element on slide 25. So again, that's the important one for accessibility purposes. So put, kind of make a little side mark for yourself. Keep that in mind. For screen readers, that's really important. Okay, here's the figure in Fig Caption. You can kind of see it's very similar. Okay, back, not that far. A table with a figure. So this is what this code looks like, right? You got a figure and a Fig Caption, and the Fig Caption kind of is just a heading above the table. Very similar to what we have, except for ours isn't inside of an H1. It very well could be inside of an H1 or an H3. If need be. There you go. Another common thing to do with tables that you'll see quite a lot is when they start, like for example here, this cell, if you will, this table cell expands 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, right? So this is considered a call span, and so that's done with an attribute literally called call span, and you're going to say that this TH, which is a sales TH, is going to have a call span of 4. Okay, and that call span attribute is going to get it to do just that. This TH, this book TH, spans 2 rows, so it's going to have a row span attribute of 2. Right, and so this is exactly how you do that. You do row span of 2, and that's your first TH. So it's going to go down those 2, and then your next TH has a call span of 4. Then our next table row doesn't need because this is 6, right? But it just needs 4 pieces of data because this one's spanning 2. Right, so our next row only needs 4 pieces of data, which is these 1, 2, 3, 4, and then this book takes up 2. So that's row span and call span. Those are fairly common in tables, a little bit different. We talked about the caption tag, and we talked about the scope. Scope of call, again, what that does is it's basically saying that this is a column header to the screen reader. So it's not a relevant piece of data, just a column header. It also can help to say, okay, well, for a screen reader, for example, I just want to know the book titles. And so it will allow the end user to say, well, just go down the HDR book column and read to me the data that's in this particular column. So it allows the screen reader to navigate the table in different ways to extract the information that they want quickly without having to go through every piece of data. So that's the way this is done, is the table heading is given an ID, and then the table data cells is given a header attribute or headers attribute that matches the ID. Okay? And so, again, the screen reader can say, hey, I want this column of information, so just read me the header years. for the year's published column. So in this chapter, tables are pretty straightforward, but there's 1, 2, 3 very useful things that you should consider for screen readers, for accessibility purposes. I went, earlier on, and I said, hey, tables can be used for layout, and historically they were. As part of that, part of the problem that came out of that was you would have tables inside of tables inside of tables inside of tables to really precisely place things on a page, like to get things exactly where you wanted them. People would nest tables. And so the problem with nested tables, so many nested tables, is that crawlers that index your site, such as Google, and they need to understand your site, they had to dive through all this wasted markup that's there for positioning to finally get to the content to understand what's on your page. And so just something to keep in mind as far as that was the problem. But it is possible to nest tables, and really what is this doing for us? It's giving us some visual separation between, on this inner table. Now this inner table, again, just visual separation is really what we're getting there. How might that be done? Well, inside of a TD, we nest a new table. And so this, TD is typically your table data, so it's usually a place for a single piece of information. But here you can see you could put an entire table inside of a TD. Okay. So a table with wrapping. What does that mean? A little bit of responsiveness to it. So you could do things like put a div around a table, or maybe give a table an 80% width. For example. So if we just target a table and say 80% width, you're going to get a little bit of responsiveness out of it if you wrap a table with a relative width. Otherwise, as you shrink the table, it's just gonna, kind of have this effect. This is more of a default behavior. Let's just see what our table does. As we can F12 it. And you can see I haven't really added any features. Now eventually you can go small enough. I mean, that's 100 pixels wide. Yeah, eventually you run out of space. But most devices, you're not that small, right? So you do get this wrapping kind of by default out of a table. And they show you to turn that off. White space, no wrap. Okay, we can turn it off. Again, we're going to be building Bootstrap tables, so not something that I do super often, but let's go ahead on my table. White space, no wrap. Let's bring this back. F12 it. And did I save and refresh?
I believe you added a hyphen and no wrap, and I don't think it needed it.
Good eye. Bada bing, bada boom. Okay, again, what we're probably more likely to do is use a Bootstrap table. Before Bootstrap, what you would do is use a media query that would say, hey, once a table got below a certain width, then change your all of your THs and TDs to display as block. And so right now, for example, the TD is an inline element, right? Because you put a bunch of TDs together. But I can THTD. Let's just change these to display block. And very easily you can get your table into a column format. Right? So you add a little media query to this and you say in a mobile format you display block, otherwise you display inline, and that's how you can manually get a table to do that. And so here's their media query. This is kind of a max width 479, right? So this would be for devices 478 and smaller, we display block. All right, so that's the fundamentals of tables. Again, didn't want to belabor that too much. Here's what I'll add to it. If we go to Get Bootstrap and go to, let's see, Content, Tables. And so, let's kind of wipe the slate clean here of our style, no style. And let's just take the Bootstrap template. So what do I need to add? Bootstrap, let me go to Getting Started before I go to Tables. Getting Started. And I'm going to copy the CSS into my project. So here's my Bootstrap CSS and my JavaScript, which is, sure, we'll do the bundle. And you remember that goes at the bottom. Okay, so now we're Bootstrap ready. And if I go back into Content, Tables, I'm just going to drag this over here. And again, I have not, this kind of brings our page back to this. Now what's interesting is my caption is now below my table just by enabling Bootstrap. That's really interesting why that might be. But as with everything in Bootstrap, just by adding a class of table, you know, I'm going to get rid of the H3 in here. You can see we get quite a bit more formatting out of the box of our table. It's also interesting, it goes 100% width and is fully responsive. Okay, so pure HTML, we don't really get much formatting. Here we do. Still surprised why the caption is going to the bottom. Let me not spend too much time on this, but I'm going to inspect and click off of that and inspect here. Table, class of table. TBody, T-row. I wonder. That's just what it does. In Bootstrap, you see when we got the caption, it just goes to the bottom. So that is the behavior of the caption versus a standard HTML. Aha, you could put the caption on the top of the table with caption top. Would you look at that? Caption hyphen top, learn something. Put that on the table, caption hyphen top. All right, problem solved. Moving on, right? So you get a lot more formatting out of the box with Bootstrap. The next thing, real quick, that you can do is add some color. So let's add the class on the table of table hyphen primary. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yep, got you just fine.
My laptop just started making a no good noise. Okay, so that's, making the table blue, and of course all of the kind of built-in I'll bring it back over here. Did you guys see the table primary?
I didn't see the prime.
Okay, yeah. So if I bring the primary back, right? So table primary, let's bring it back like this. Sorry, let me get this formatted like I had it. On a row, you could put these on rows as well. So here on this second row, class of table danger, right? So we can just, with Bootstrap, apply colors to the whole table, to individual rows, to individual cells, table info. Right? So change individual cell colors. One that I think is pretty nice. Let's go back to the table primary. I'm going to take all the colors out right now. Okay. That alternating table hyphen striped. So by adding table striped, you can see that's kind of with the default. Now if I do the dark, table dark, right? So we get alternating in a dark mode. So that's pretty good. Same thing with all the other. Let's see.
Now, if you added a hyphen to that stripe, could you add what color you want that to be? The alternating.
What color it actually is could probably be overridden. But it's always based on the table color. So since this is table dark, like if I do table success, right, there's going to be alternating colors, like a light green and a dark green. So a dark will, right? So in other words, it has its default. It can be overridden. Yes is the answer to that question, but it does have its default values. Table hover allows them to have like a hover effect. I don't know how useful that is, but might help them visually to see it. Let's do table hyphen bordered. So that gets those inner borders going on that we did before. Now again, its default is to go 100% width. Of course, if you don't want that, you're just going to need to put it inside of a grid, right? So div class container fluid, div class of row, div class call hyphen for, and let's put this table inside of the middle column, right? So now it is a third of the page, right? Not going 100% width. So you just got to put it inside of a grid to fix that. Let's see, borderless table, table hyphen border less. I think the default is borderless. Borderless. There we go. Okay, so small difference there. So I'll bring that back. It's really just the border at the top that it gets rid of. And I'm literally 2/3 of the way through the Bootstrap docs, covering all the different ways to style tables. But that's the gist of it. And Bootstrap makes it pretty easy. Throw the class of table on your table, all the different classes can be simply added to get it styled the way that you want inside of a grid. And there you have it. That is a crash course on tables. Any questions out there?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, we'll go ahead and stop the recording there.